All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Hill. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Start9. Start9 is primarily responsible for making an open source Linux distribution called StartOS, which makes it easy for a non-technical person to own and operate a personal server, as opposed to a personal computer or mobile device, which we're all more familiar with. Why would someone want to run a personal server? At this conference, one of the main answers to that question is to run a Bitcoin node or a Lightning node, or one of the various Bitcoin and Lightning services that are available on top of those protocols. So today I'm going to be talking about nodes. In particular, I'm going to be talking about nodes in the context of Bitcoin's political nature and structure. So I'm going to be talking about Bitcoin politics here, all right? More specifically, which constituencies of Bitcoin have which powers, and how do they use those powers in both peacetime and wartime. There are 5 constituencies of Bitcoin's consensus. I'll back off that phrase a little bit and preface everything I'm about to say with, this is a model. This is one way of thinking about Bitcoin's political infrastructure based on our current understanding and history. There are other models that consider constituencies that I will not touch on today as having political power, and those models are not incorrect, but I prefer to think about Bitcoin's political apparatus in the following way, and I hope that it will be helpful for you as well. And as we go through, we'll see why I think the nodes in particular have a very meaningful, seldomly exercised form of power. I don't know how to change the slide. All right. The American system. 3 branches of government. We're all fairly familiar with this. You have the legislative branch. They create the laws. They represent the people and create the laws that the people want, in accordance with the Constitution, of course, or at least it's supposed to be. You have the judicial branch. They interpret the law. And you have the executive branch, which is responsible for enforcing the law. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance to all of this, but 3 branches of government. Why do we have 3 branches of government? Because balance of power is important. You do not want an executive who is a dictator telling everyone what to do. We tried that. It doesn't work so well over the long term, so we came up with a better system. Now, I think I skipped a slide, didn't I? Oh, no, I didn't. There we go. Sorry, guys. I will figure this out, I promise. All right. Bitcoin does not have 3 branches of government, and I hesitated to call them 3 branches of consensus because it's just too reminiscent. They're not really branches. They are constituencies, right? These are different people who have a stake and a power within Bitcoin's political apparatus. These are the miners. This is the first one that a lot of people will think about when they think about power in Bitcoin and consensus creation. The miners secure the network. They add new blocks to the chain by performing proof of work, effectively securing Bitcoin against attacks, both large and small. Exchanges facilitate liquidity, right? They bring new capital into the system. And they also influence what people's perception of Bitcoin is. What an exchange calls Bitcoin to some people would be Bitcoin. So the choice of the ticker symbol is actually pretty important in helping form public perception and therefore consensus. Wallets provide user access to the network. They are most people's entry point and means of dealing with the Bitcoin network, and wallet developers can choose which features to expose in their wallets and which features to forego. And so even if Bitcoin has the ability to do a thing, 99.9% of people might not do that thing because their wallet doesn't make the feature available to them. And so wallet developers need to be taken into consideration and do have a power when it comes to deciding what Bitcoin is, how it's used, and what it will become in the future. Protocol developers. This is another obvious one that people reach for when they think about what is permitted and available on Bitcoin, because they're the ones writing the code. Protocol developers, they propose and maintain Bitcoin software implementations. They're the dominant one, and since the very beginning, the reference implementation is Bitcoin Core, and they, for 15 years now, have been proposing and implementing and maintaining the software that defines Bitcoin that we all use today and is the reason we're all here. And finally, you have the nodes. Nodes independently enforce the rules of the network by validating and relaying transactions and blocks. So the nodes are the traffic police, is probably the worst derogatory term I could call them, but the analogy holds. They're making sure that everyone's playing by the rules, and if anyone tries to violate the rules, they're immediately banned and banished forever. They also have other more subtle powers, which I will get into here in a second. But this is Bitcoin politics. These are the 5 constituencies of consensus. As I mentioned earlier, arguments could be made that investors are a constituency, media influencers are a constituency, politicians that have force in meat space could have influence over Bitcoin's present and future. But all of those, in my opinion, are actually just influencing these people in different ways. These people are the ones who are pushing the buttons that result in what we call Bitcoin. So I'm going to focus on the last one because that's what I do and what my company does, is we make it easy for people to run a node. So I'm going to focus on why you would want to run a node, both personal and benefits to the network. Personal benefits. One is security. When you run a node, you can verify your transactions and balances without asking a third party. So if you download a wallet onto your phone and you immediately begin transacting, you are 100% involving a third party into your financial life. Whatever wallet you downloaded also has a node running in the background, and every time you receive a transaction or send a transaction, it is passing through that node. It's a server that is not owned and operated by you, the user, and so whoever owns and operates that server has pretty keen insight into your financial life. They can see every transaction you're sending, they can see every transaction you're receiving, and if they were a bad actor, they could actually forge transactions to you, and there's no way you could tell the difference. They could make your wallet beep and pretend that you got money when you did not. You could attempt to send money, and it could say that it sent when it did not. This doesn't happen on a daily basis, but the very fact that it's possible means it's inevitable, and so resilience to these types of future problems is a good idea. When you run your own node, you connect the wallet on your phone to the node in your home, and now you can transact with privacy and impunity, which leads into the second bullet here, which is privacy. You can transact privately. You can look up any block, any address, any transaction ID, totally privately from your own phone or laptop, which is connected to your own node, and effectively explore the entire world of Bitcoin without anyone knowing what you're looking for, or even knowing that you're looking for anything at all, or knowing that you exist. So that is only available to you if you run a node with certain software installed on it, and then you use it from your phone or laptop. Lightning integrations, if you are running Lightning and you want it to be in a non-custodial, private way, you must be running a Lightning node on your server that is connected to the Bitcoin node on your server. Censorship resistance, this kind of plays into what I talked about with the privacy bullet, which is that when you run your own node, nobody can deny you access to the Bitcoin network or the Lightning network. Nobody even knows that it's you who's accessing the network. So if you want to send somebody money, and let's pretend, not that this is true, that somebody here is an enemy of the state, and you want to send money to somebody in another country, and that would otherwise be censored or blocked, the only way that you're going to get that transaction through with any degree of assurance is by running your own node. Again, that's not the primary use case here, but some people do, some very good people do, live in horrible despotic regimes and are just trying to live their lives and yet being financially censored. So for some people, it's a very real thing, even if it's not for me and you today in this place. Political power. And this is where I'm going to kind of take the conversation from here forward. The last reason that you would want to run a node is because it affords you a degree of political power in Bitcoin. Of the 5 constituencies, most people here, the only avenue that you have to political power is node operatorship, right? Unless you are a protocol developer, a wallet developer, you own a Bitcoin exchange, you know, or you are a miner, which maybe some of you are. Running a Bitcoin node is the only means to political power that you have, which is similar to the society that we live in meat space, right? Most of the political power you have is to cast a vote. Similar to the Bitcoin space. When you run a node, you get a vote. So I'll explain what that means here in a little more detail. Second benefits of running a node is that you are benefiting the network, okay? You're not just benefiting yourself in all the ways that I listed, you are also benefiting the network as a whole. You are enforcing consensus. You're making sure that all transactions and blocks that anyone would attempt to create are valid and conforming to the rules. Otherwise, you ban them. It's a very important service. You propagate the valid blocks and transactions that you encounter, which makes it so that people can effectively transact. You verify the entire ledger. When you sync from Genesis, you're verifying the entire history of Bitcoin and in fact helping new nodes that join the network verify that everything is correct. And lastly, you are serving as a check on power of the other constituencies, right? You're keeping the protocol developers in check. You're keeping the miners in check. You're keeping the exchanges in check. And that, because when nodes are combining their forces, so to speak, when acting together, they are the most powerful force in Bitcoin, which we'll all talk about now. So effectively, it's decentralization. That's the benefit to the network, and it's through those various bullets. Okay, nodes have 2 powers within their political constituency. One is relay policy, okay? Nodes get to decide which transactions are free to propagate through the peer-to-peer network. This does not mean that these transactions are invalid. So I want to highlight a very important distinction right now between consensus and non-consensus transactions and standard and non-standard transactions. These mean very different things. A consensus transaction means a transaction that conforms to the consensus rules of the Bitcoin network. A non-consensus transaction means somebody is trying to cheat, and they should be banned and are banned immediately. This works very well. Standard and non-standard is a layer above that. It's basically saying, what is the primary, standard, common way that people use the Bitcoin network? What is a normal, run-of-the-mill, first standard deviation transaction look like? That it would be a standard transaction. Something that is outside of 2 standard deviations, right, roughly, is now going to be a non-standard transaction. And it is up to the nodes to define what is a standard transaction and what is a non-standard transaction. And they do this through something called policy, relay policy. When you receive a transaction, your node inspects it and says, is this standard according to me? It is a very subjective opinion. And then if I decide it's standard, I pass it to the next node and they inspect it for standardness. And if it passes their definition, then it is then passed to the next node. It eventually lands in a miner and gets mined. If I define a transaction as non-standard, I say, I don't think that's a normal transaction. That feels a little weird to me. Then I don't have to forward it along. I'm not violating consensus. It's my node. I get to choose what passes through it on its way to a miner. Okay, after it's in a miner, I have no choice. But on its way to a miner, I get to choose. And if it just so happens that everyone else agrees with me, so I say, I think this is a non-standard transaction. I think it's very awkward, or I don't like it. I don't think it's immoral, whatever it happens to be. And let's say that everyone else agrees with me. And in fact, I need about 90%. If 90% of the other nodes on the network agree with me, that transaction ain't getting in, it's not getting to a miner, not through the P2P network. And this serves an important function because it protects against spam, and it protects against denial of service attacks, and it is a way that nodes signal to each other about how they want people to be using the Bitcoin network. It's your way of announcing to the world, this is what I think Bitcoin should be used for. And if everyone agrees with me, then the only transactions that will propagate through the P2P network are those transactions. Other transactions are, quote, second-class citizens at that point, because 90% of the network thinks they should be, and therefore have to get into a block another way. But they're not banned. That's important to recognize. They just have to get in another way, which means added effort and cost, therefore sort of keeping those types of transactions minimal. And if they ever became really popular and everyone was handing them directly to miners, circumventing the P2P network, the nodes could say, okay, those seem pretty standard now. Let's remove the filter. Let's open up policy a little bit and allow these things first-class citizenship, because clearly there's enormous economic demand for them. Anyway, that's one power of the nodes. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed this up. That is what we call diplomacy. This is the nodes in a very polite, diplomatic way saying, we have a power to define standard and non-standard transactions in order to optimize the Bitcoin network for a particular type of transaction. There is some controversy in Bitcoin right now, for those of you who are not aware, where that power, the ability to define standard and non-standard according to a variety of different criteria, is being dwindled away to a degree. The nodes only have two powers. They have relay policy, and they have war. They have user-activated soft fork and user-resisted soft fork powers, which cannot be taken away from the nodes. So let's say you were a constituency of Bitcoin that had to deal with the nodes, because you do, because they have a rightful place, an undeniable place in Bitcoin's political ecosystem. The nodes only have two powers. They have the friendly way of enforcing certain types of transactions, and then they have the nuclear option. And so if the nodes are denied their ability to cooperate in a diplomatic, friendly way, and 90% of them want a certain type of transaction to be defined as non-standard, the only way that they now have to define that transaction as non-standard is to also define it as non-consensus. Which means the transaction, if that were to happen, if 90% of nodes wanted a certain type of transaction out of the Bitcoin network and they couldn't do it through policy, they absolutely, with 90% consensus, could enforce a consensus rule that banned that transaction for all of the future. So forget about being able to sideload it to a miner or circumvent the P2P network in one way or another. The nodes have the ability to nuke the transaction from existence. So in a way, and where I wanted to get to with a little bit more time, is this is sort of a call for people to node up, right, in the first place. Get yourself a node. You don't have to buy anything from us. I don't care about that. Get yourself a node so that you can be heard on the network, so that you have a voice on the network. And it's also a little bit of a warning shot to the other constituencies of the nodes only have two political powers. And if you take away the friendly one, they will be left with one power, which nobody wants. Nobody wants a nuclear war in Bitcoin. We don't want a contentious soft fork. But in the absence of the ability to create policy that divides transactions into standard and non-standard, all we can do is divide them into consensus and non-consensus. And if 90% of the nodes want something, it's going to happen. There's no force in Bitcoin that can offset 90% of nodes wanting something to happen. They are the ultimate power in Bitcoin. So anyway, if you want a little bit of political power and any of this is interesting to you, get a node, read up on this stuff, because unfortunately, there probably is a soft fork coming in the next couple of years. We hope that it is non-contentious and simply implements some really cool new features that everybody wants. But there's a bit of arguing taking place in Bitcoin right now. And if you have a stance on that argument, the only way to be heard and to make a difference is to node up and choose the policies and consensus rules that you yourself believe in. Thank you very much. Sorry I kind of ran out of time there, but hope you enjoyed it.